So I'm going to redo. I had really bad internet connection, so I'm trying again here. Hello everyone. Um, I have been sitting on this video for probably a month. This kind of all started shifting into focus for me right before Easter. And I just pray that God puts the words in my mouth because this is really big and I'm trying so hard to grasp it myself, and I'm trying so hard not to lose it because I feel so strongly that this is so pivotal for me as I walk out my faith with God every day, and as I walk this out in relationships. If I don't get this, it all starts to fall apart and it all starts to crumble. So a little bit of background. So as a counselor, I sit with people every day and I talk with them and I start identifying core fears for them and core injuries. When they begin attaching in childhood to people in their lives, like their mom or their dad or these core primary attachment figures, they learn about love in those relationships, and they learn what is safe and they learn what is not safe. And in those places, no one's perfect, right? So in those places where we're totally reliant on somebody else, we'll get let down in certain ways or we'll get hurt. And in those places where we get hurt and in those places where attachment is interrupted, we begin to develop these places and these ways to defend ourselves, these defense mechanisms or these ways of interacting with people to try to make sure that we're never hurt again. And so when we come to therapy, what has happened is those ways that we have developed and those things that we've learned are safe or unsafe, they are reactivated when we begin to try to let people into those core close places in our lives. And as we become intimate again with other people and we crave connection, we crave intimacy, we come against our core fears. We come up against these things that we've wanted to protect and we're afraid we'll get hurt again. And as we try to let people in and to feel close, we're also giving them the power to hurt us again in these places. And it's this battle that occurs. And we can end up treating the people closest to us as our deepest enemies, because they become our biggest threats to these places that could get hurt again. And these defense mechanisms that are created to keep us safe, ironically, become the things that keep us from the things we most desire. And this isn't just bad things. So a lot of times we try to hide the things that we're ashamed of. We try to hide the things that we know are not perfect because we desperately want this person to love us and to not betray us or not hurt us. But sometimes we also, and I've recently discovered in my own life, I don't just hide the bad things. Sometimes I hide the good things. I hide the things that I'm excited about. I hide the things that I'm dreaming about because I'm afraid that people won't be excited with me, or I'm afraid that they will take control of these things and they won't understand, or they won't appreciate them, or they won't hold them gently the way I am. And so I cloister them off, right? And I lock these things away and I keep them hidden. And that's how I defended them for so long, is I didn't let myself show my excitement. I didn't let myself show all my cards, and I kept things secret and I kept these hidden away. So the dynamic is different for everyone, right? But for me, that's been kind of recently I've started to kind of learn that about myself, that this is like a defense mechanism that I'm fighting against. Because what I've learned as I sit with client after client is we all have those defense mechanisms, but those become the things that keep us from the things that we most desire. And we desire intimacy, and we desire closeness, and we desire for people to see us and love us for who we are, warts and all. Yet we don't have the courage to actually let people see the bad, or even let people see the good, right? We don't know how to be vulnerable enough to actually get to that place of connection with others. So I've been sitting with this, and I sit with this with clients, and I know this to a certain level. But as I've hit these places in my own personal life, this has become a deeply spiritual journey, which I guess is typically how it goes. And it's become much more than just counseling theories in my head. So I was sitting in this really vulnerable place right before Easter, and I was hitting these things that were so hard to share with others. And everything within me, right, every defense mechanism in me was screaming to not, like to give a less candid version, to try to protect this, to try to protect myself. And I was really leaning into the fact that I can't do that anymore. I have to live completely open and not listen to those fears, but learn how to be vulnerable. And I felt God whispering to me, again, it was right before Easter, I felt God whispering to me that this is what we do with him. That so often he is sitting there and he is desperately wanting all of us. And yet everything in us is too afraid to be exposed to that level. And we somehow in our way of trying to protect ourselves and in our shame, we try to protect, or we try to edit what we're doing before him. And we bring an edited version to him. And we don't live exposed before him because we're afraid and we're ashamed of what is true. I was reading a book a while back by Francis Chan, and the Bible describes God sitting on his throne, and he is surrounded by unapproachable light. And I'm realizing that so much of our struggle in our relationship with God has to do with our shame, and has to do with our overarching inability and our difficulty and our struggle and our fear of being open and vulnerable and being exposed. Because God, at his very core of his nature, is exposing. He is light. And as I've been sitting with this concept, I've fallen into 1 John. At 1 John, it says, God is light, and in him there is no darkness. And I've been sitting with this fact that the things that are warped in our life, and the things that we begin to be afraid of, and the things that we don't want to expose, and our shames, and the things that we learn to cloister away in darkness to remain safe, they are the things that prevent us from stepping in courage into the presence and into the light of God. And not only do they hinder us from being able to approach the throne of God and to feel loved and open before the throne of God, but they also become the stumbling block, and they also begin to hinder our ability to connect and be intimate with those around us. And so I've been sitting in 1 John, and it all just became this beautiful picture. And I've become really convinced that our relationships at the human level and our ability to be intimate with others and close. 1 John says our ability to love. Our ability to love is directly linked to our ability to sit in the light of the throne room of God. And it basically says that, if we're not able to live exposed and vulnerable, we won't be able to love. And I was like, why is that? And it makes sense as I sit with the counseling side of it. But I was trying to figure out how, right? How do you step in? How do you let these dark places become exposed? How do you find the courage to do that when it's scary and people are fallible and these things are shameful? And basically, 1 John was talking about how we try to edit and we try to make it acceptable, right? We try to find our courage to step into the light by making it all better first, so that it's less scary and it's less shameful. And 1 John basically says that is not ever going to work, and that is not true intimacy, and that is not truly experiencing the love of God. But it is the act. It is the only way we can gain courage to step into the unapproachable light of God is if we are sure that He loves us. And 1 John just kind of talks you through this journey of stepping into the light because God is perfect love. And despite the fact of our unworthiness, we can trust that we will not be punished and we will not be hated or resented in these places of vulnerability. And it's this unapproachable, and yet it's this gentle light that comes and floods in. And then 1 John, it makes this promise that if we will step into the light and we will let God expose the darkness, God has this way, it makes this comment that the darkness becomes light. And there's this redemptive process that happens where as we let God expose those places of darkness, they become light, and they become our testimony, and they become our story of how God has loved us and how he has transformed us and how the darkness is no longer there. So instead of editing the darkness and trying to make it acceptable before we step into the light, it's how do we welcome the light of God into those places, and how do we admit and come to him exactly how we are and not hold those places from him? How do we experience closeness to God? But then how do we experience the transformation that happens when light floods in? And how do we then turn around and now that we are without fear, now that we are fully known by God, how does that change our relationships with other people? When I have experienced the love and the forgiveness and the transformation of God, and I have been humbled and fully exposed in the light of God, how does that change the way I treat other people who are still hiding in darkness? How does that flood me with empathy and love for these other people who are on that journey, who need the light of God just as much as I do? It levels the playing field in this way. And all of a sudden I have this love because 1 John says that we are only able to love because he first loved us. And it's like, how do you experience the love of God in the throne room of God, in the light of God? Because only after I have done that will I be able to love others in their imperfection. This is really cliche. I know people have said this so many times, but I'm starting to experience this for myself in my day-to-day life. And I'm starting to hit these places of shame and these places of darkness, and I'm learning to sit. And I'm learning, how do I welcome in God's light into these places? Because these things are true. And these things are absolutely flaws, and these are absolutely faults within me. But they are no longer a threat if I have the light of God. They are redeemable. And they no longer have to be a source of shame. They no longer have to be a source of, they don't have to be something that I hide. But they can be a place that I lean into and let God shine on. And I get to sit in the front row and watch God redeem them. And I get to sit and I get to watch as he not only redeems them and makes them light, but then they become the place that I connect to other people on and love other people in. And it overflows from this place that that he's done it in me. This is really, I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but this is huge. And it changes everything. And I think I'm just sitting in this place today where I'm really hoping I don't lose it. That I want to continue to hit those places of fear and hit those places of shame and darkness and lean into them and not let them be a threat, but let them be a place that I can be open and honest in, because I know that God has seen it, and I know that God will redeem it, and I know that he is working on me, and therefore other people can see it. And it's no longer a hit, but I sit with Paul, and he talks about how he now boasts in his weaknesses because they are where God is strongest. And that has kind of become the dynamic of, I don't have to be perfect, and I don't have to hide these weaknesses, but I want to boast in what God has done to transform them. And only if I'm open and only if I'm honest about the places where I'm failing can I be really, can I become an example of what God can do and his power. So anyway, I don't know if that's challenging to anyone else but me, but I would say that this is what changes, and this is what brings us into fellowship with one another. And 1 John is pretty blatant. It says that not everyone in the church has experienced this. That there are people among us who they will see the light, and yet they will hide from it. And that they will know, and they will be told that God loves them, but they will never experience it for themselves because it is just too scary to step into the light. And so I hope you'll join me. I hope you will explore this with me, but I don't want to sit on the sidelines and just know that the light is there. I don't want to hide from it the rest of my life, but I want the transformation that only comes with stepping in. And I'm on this journey where it is just absolutely unimaginable what can happen as you do that. And it's incredibly humbling, but it is so beautiful, and it's better than anything I could have ever imagined. And it's not that everything's perfect, but it's this freedom from myself. It's this freedom from my fears. It's this freedom from the shame. The Bible talks about how his burden is easy and his yoke is light. And I just get this picture of a God who is begging us to step into this life that is in the light. And it's no longer shameful, and it's no longer dark, and it's no longer worried. And it's this ability to dance carefree and childlike and giddy in the presence of God. But we hold on so tightly to these things that we're ashamed of. And we keep things in darkness, and we fight that process. And you just get this idea that we have this loving God sitting on this throne. And yes, he is in the light, but he is good, and he is gentle, and he is loving. And he wants to envelop us, and he wants to expose those darknesses, and he doesn't want those things to have power over us anymore. And he's just begging us to come farther in. Higher up and further in. It's a quote from C.S. Lewis, and it will always bring us in front of the mirror, and it will always make us fight these different dark places in ourselves, but it is always 100% worth it. So I'm getting on here, and I'm reminding myself of that today, and I'm hoping that there is never, ever, ever a darkness that I don't know, that convinces me that it's not worth stepping into the light. That's never worth it. So anyway, love you all on here. That's my update. God is doing awesome, exciting things, and I am so thankful that as I turn over different darknesses to him, he is just flooding in and redeeming them and making them something beautiful in a way I just never ever thought possible. And I want to stay in the light. I want to stay in these places where I get to watch him work. So, love you all. God bless you. Give over darkness to him today.